have to shut me up.
No. Well, no, we're in this together. So, okay. All right. So now we're live.
All right.
So hello, welcome all. My apologies to Ashley and to you. We got a little bit of the time difference, time change, because in California we're on daylight savings, and so we thought this was going to be 11 a.m. my time, 6 p.m. his time. So anyhow, we started a little earlier. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll have to go to my Google Plus page, and that is Lilocan Skathach live streams, and you go to live streams and you should be able to, there'll be a little icon up in the corner. You can click that for Q&A. So if you have any questions for either Ashley or myself, you can ask them and we'll see them pop up. And when we have a chance, we'll stop and answer your question. And so that's pretty much about it. So my guest today is Ashley Mortimer of the Doreen Valiente Foundation, and I'll turn it over to him.
Ah, it's me. I'm on. Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
Hi, greetings to you all. Yes, we did get our timings a bit wrong, and you know, it's 3 a.m. here, so I'm really tired, obviously.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. We're good. No, it's 7 p.m. So yeah, we got our timings a little bit wrong. My name is Ashley Mortimer. I'm a trustee of the Doreen Valiente Foundation, and I'm a director of the Centre for Pagan Studies. And I've been called a lot of other things as well. You and I have done interviews before, and yeah, I think we get a bit carried away, don't we?
A little bit. Well, a little bit. We'll try to keep it down on this call.
We're both interested in the same subjects, and we're both kind of excited by them, and I think that's a really great thing. I think that's tremendous.
Yeah. I mean, it's just craft history to me. It's just fascinating. I love learning about it. And I was reading the latest book from Philip Heselton, Doreen Valiente Witch, and I really
we published that book. I saw the layout. Yeah, it was a good book.
Mm-hmm. And I like the section that you wrote in the back when you were talking about your experience getting into Doreen Valiente Foundation and meeting John Bellan-Payne for the first time, and then Patricia Crowther.
Well, yeah, thank you. I mean, when I first gave a talk in public, John said to me, "My advice to you is to talk about yourself." And I said, "I think that's the last thing people want to hear." And he said, "No, if you tell your story and tell things the way you saw it, that will encourage other people to connect personally with it." So I was a little bit reticent, but when it came to the book, then that's when John said, "Now you really should tell your story. So you should tell it how you saw it, because you're now the next sort of generation, the next bit of the ongoing story." I mean, they were quite prophetic words, because, as you know, John passed away suddenly in February and left us. And whether he knew or not, I don't know. That's another matter. But yeah, I did. I just wrote the piece truthfully as it was, and it was a kind of very special moment in my life that I'll never ever forget. Life changed for me the day I signed that bit of paper. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I mean, when I heard that about John, I was shocked. I mean, I was just, because I didn't have a close relationship with him like you and you had, and definitely Sarah had. But when I heard about his passing, it was so sudden, and immediately I thought about Julie and his family, and just what it must have been like for them. And I was also really amazed that what he had done was he had prepared for this, it seems, and the way that he set up the foundation and everything to protect Doreen's legacy, and to me it was just amazing that he had gotten all this done. They got the book published, and then he passed. I mean, it was really amazing.
No, I mean, it was very sudden. It was very sudden, and we were plotting the exhibition that's now open at Royal Pavilion Museums at Preston Manor in Brighton. John and I, the night before he died, we were discussing the sizes of nuts and bolts that were going to go into the display cases. So he was involved in everything right up to the very end, and it was just very sudden and really shocking. And the only thing, I mean, talked to Julie within a few minutes of him passing, and quite shortly after that, we knew what we had to do. There is no way that John would have ever forgiven us if we hadn't carried on and made the exhibition happen. And it was a lot of work, and it was very difficult, and the funeral in the middle of that as well. It was not a very nice time, but we knew that what we were doing was exactly what John wanted. It was his life work, and as you say, the very establishment of the foundation was designed to protect the legacy against even, the trustees passing away or whatever else. So that's what's happened, and there's been no problem with inheritance or anything like that, because the foundation is perpetual. It's eternal, I suppose. It's a trust that that requires 5 trustees, and there's always going to be 5 trustees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
so here we are. We did,
Yeah, so I was just amazed about that. So how is the I had a question and it escaped me, but I guess how's the foundation? I mean, you had an exposition recently in Brighton, right? How is that going?
Yeah, that's been what we've been working on tirelessly, John especially, over the last 12 months or so. Yeah, it's going really well. It opened in April. It was really quite an emotional day opening the exhibition, because of course John should have been there. Julie cut the ribbons. Sarah and I and Stephanie Parker, our marketing person, held the ribbon. We had a lot of visitors through the door. I think the museum people at Royal Pavilion Museums in Brighton were quite shocked, I think, at how many people were interested. Not just pagans either. We've had a lot of good press. We've had some national, international media, done a load of television and radio, and the visitors are pouring through, and it seems to be pleasing people. We've got a lot of good feedback. It's very difficult to sort of tell the whole story of paganism, show Gerald and Doreen in context with that, explain what modern day witchcraft is, and do that to a mixed audience, a completely mixed audience, from school children, members of the public, well-known pagans or pagan historians. So yeah, I had to choose my words carefully in the way we wrote all the display boards, but people seem pleased and excited, and I think that's the bit that I'm the happiest about, that people come away excited and enthused, that they are excited to see Gerald Gardner's one, Doreen Valiente's Athame, Doreen's original Books of Shadows, Gerald's Book of Shadows is on display currently as well. So those are artifacts of the craft that are so important, but the excitement of people at seeing them is really awesome. I think that's wonderful. And I've enjoyed hearing the comments from people who are kind of, they see, well, we can talk about the Books of Shadows in a bit, but I'll tell you about that later when we talk. Remind me to mention Doreen's Blue Book.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, well, the Blue Book is on display, and it's on display kind of tucked away at the back of one of the exhibits, and those who know what it is and know its significance, they spot it and they go, "Is that Doreen's? Is that the Blue Book?" And I say, "Yes." And they're, wow. And other people say, "Well, what was that little blue book at the back? What does that mean? Is that significant?" And I'll just say, "Significant, yeah." So I'm kind of enjoying the fact that the exhibition, yeah. Well, I mean, the exhibition gets people on different levels, and that was really what we intended and what we talked about. So it's been really pleasing, and the visitor figures are good. So we're going to stay open longer. We were supposed to be open for the season to the end of September, but we're now going to stay open through till the middle of November, when the big conference here in Europe, Witchfest, takes place in November, which is moving from its normal home in Croydon down to Brighton. So Brighton really is the place. I'm pleased to say also that some of our local supporters and volunteers are involved in a theatre company who have done a play about Doreen, which opens the week of Witchfest as well. So if you're planning a visit to the UK, that's the time to come. As I think it's the 3rd, might be later in November. Witchfest week. It's all happening in Brighton.
And if
there's the plug.
I was going to say, and if people go to the Doreen Valiente Foundation webpage, you probably have a link to the museum in Brighton, right?
Absolutely. There's links everywhere, and the new website that we set up about the museum, which we keep expanding, is wherewitchcraftlives.org.
Okay, and I'll also, after this broadcast goes live, I'll put links down below so people can just actually click that and it'll go directly to that. So I'll get those links from you after this.
Super cool. And you can always find us on Facebook, the Centre for Pagan Studies group, and you can message me and you might even get a reply. My inbox is quite busy at the minute, but I do reply to everybody who contacts me, everybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it seems like I go on Facebook and there's you like doing an interview like on somewhere. You're like the main face of paganism right now. The
Oh,
PR
no,
guy.
no, no. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
All right, maybe not paganism. Doreen
No,
Valiente
I know
Foundation.
what you're saying.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying, and I've done some really good interviews. Some of the journalists I've been lucky enough, just by chance, to have been interviewed with, we hit it off in the way that you and I do, and we got interested and excited. And they always say, "Oh, don't you say? Aren't you passionate about your subject?" And it's ever so interesting. Yeah, I already know. I've known for 20 years it's an interesting subject. But yeah, it has. We've had a lot of attention because of the museum and the exhibition. I mean, to some extent, this is the establishment that pagans have been on the fringes of all those years. And it's kind of just another example of somebody in the pagan community, I don't know, breaking through into the establishment. I mean, it doesn't get much more establishment than Royal Pavilion Museums. You know, they're a big organization, they're a big thing. It's the council in Brighton, it's national, it's important mainstream part of society that pagans are traditionally not. So I think that's one of the things that's generated a lot of the interest, and that's made the media and their questions have been. I've been ever so lucky, much luckier than everybody who went before me into doing interviews on paganism, because they've been so respectful.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the. I think that's what's going on. I think the seeing a pagans. You know, it's hard to be. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. You know what they can be like in the media, the way they want to marginalize pagans and make fun of us and make us out to be weirdos and nutters and crazy and all the rest of it. And that goes away a little bit when they've got to do it standing in an amazing museum like the Royal Pavilion Museums with an exhibition, serious exhibition on paganism. So I think, you know, I feel like we've struck a bit of a blow for representation in the wider public, and can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. I think especially that that little movie that came out on BBC. Basically it was about Gerald Gardner and how he gave the gift of Wicca to really the world. And they had Philip. Ronald Hutton on it, Philip Heselton, and also John was in that. But I think that really showed that, especially in the United Kingdom, it seems like paganism it's very acceptable. It's part of the culture now. And in America, we haven't quite gotten to that point. And I think people are kind of like, you have two camps. You have one camp that kind of like wants to go out there and be in the public eye, and then you have that other camp that's kind of like, let's just kind of keep it a little to ourselves right now, and kind of, you know, so you kind of get these two people who are in one way or the other that want to be accepted by society, and then the other side is kind of like, you know, let's just go ahead and just keep it to ourselves, you know.
I agree. I think a lot of the pagans have enjoyed and reveled in being on the fringes of society. And it's kind of a fun place, an exciting place to be. The thing is that some of us aren't. You know, it's becoming so widespread and so big that we've got issues that have to be tackled that you can only do if you start taking part in the rest of society. You know, if you want your children in schools to hear about paganism, then somebody's got to sit on those boring committees where they decide what religious education is taught in schools. I mean, in my case, it's my girlfriend sits on those committees, and I go too, and we do that. Like you say, I'm the face of it. She's the brains, really. But you know, wants to be outed. Definitely doesn't want to be outed, and I think they're entitled to their anonymity and their privacy when they need it. I mean, as you know, initiates of the craft remain bound by their oaths to secrecy about the way that the craft works. That the craft is nowhere near. It's only a small pagan community in the pagan landscape now, and you know, and not every pagan has those feelings either. So I think we've got to be respectful of everybody's views and opinions. You know, I mean, there are loudmouth big faces like mine that stuff their face on television and annoy people. I mean, it's funny. I was laughing with a journalist I did a radio interview for the other day. It was a national radio piece. And afterwards he said, "How did you feel?" And I said, "Well, you know, the questions weren't very, very deep, but that was okay. And he said, no, I mean, did you think it went well? And I said, yeah, I did, because I didn't come over like an idiot. And that's still kind of primary media thing for pagans representing the media, is don't look like you're an idiot. Don't look like an idiot. Don't say something stupid or outlandish. And I think the more that happens, the more that the rest of society kind of, the focus comes away, the stigmas go away. They kind of go, oh yeah, paganism, that's quite interesting. No, right. There's nothing to see here. There's no sensationalism. You know, the guy isn't going to go trying to cast spells on television or wave his robes about, or, you know. And the last thing that the national media needs is a view of me jumping naked over a bonfire, I can tell you.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of the things that I do. Many of my videos is I debunk a lot of these, you know, stereotypes and really just kind of outlandish propaganda that a lot of people believe behind, especially witchcraft and paganism. I was in a chat room, this Christian chat room, where these people, you know, they're into like the Nephilim, they're into all these various esoteric parts of Christianity. And one of the things that they truly believe is that there's this Illuminati satanic conspiracy, and that is what they believe. And I was in there and I was kind of listening and I was kind of trying to, you know, politely kind of correct it. And they're like, oh, no, you don't know. You're too low on the totem pole. I'm like, but it's true. A lot of people, they have such a skewed perspective of what we actually do. And if they actually saw what we did, they'd probably be disappointed. It's like, this is boring. This is what you actually do for Samhain or for Beltane. It's like, yeah, that's what we do. You know, we're not out like sacrificing children. You know?
No, I like you say, you know, this great conspiracy, this idea that there's some sort of wonderful, wild, naked orgy of witches that takes place every full moon. I've not been invited to one yet.
Oh, you haven't?
I keep trying to get on the list.
No, that comes up in the higher level.
We're getting into a different area there, but and I know you want to talk about a couple of other topics, but yes, you're right. I think that all religion being practiced by religious people, if viewed from the outside by people who are not aware of the symbology of what's going on, it's going to look faintly ridiculous. You know, I think if you saw witches gathered, people shuffling around in a circle, and there might be a fire or something, and you know, there's nothing to see here. And I suppose that the other religions must appear the same. You know, what's that strange guy in those weird clothes doing, holding up his cup and holding up his bit of bread? And it doesn't make any sense until you understand the nuance of this religious practice. But I think the battle that we've been fighting, that we're starting apparently to win, and I hope the same is true in America, is that pagans and are being seen as people of faith, people with a religion or religions who are partaking in that religion in exactly the same mechanical way that other religions operate, and that there's nothing going on under the scenes. There's nothing more outlandish than you would find anywhere else. You know, the mechanics of religion are pretty similar across all the faiths, because it's external ritual, which is obviously symbolic of an internal process. But hey, you know, that's another debate for another day, I think.
Yeah. So we also talked about Gardner's adventures into Scotland, and
yes, I mean, I'm on a bit of a research thing at the minute. That's what I'm researching into. There's a very interesting and letters that exist that indicate that Gerald had other contacts, witchcraft contacts, some of which he'd started himself and some of which he was trying to find, other than the New Forest witches. And one of those areas is because, of course, he was up on the Isle of Man. This is when he opened the museum in the sort of early 50s, Doreen, and initiated Doreen Valiente, which was 52, 53, met and initiated a year later. He was quite interested in what was going on in Scotland. And there's this guy whose name is Charles Clark, who Gerald had him answering letters for him. And he caused Charles to be initiated into the craft, and Clark was sent across Scotland to get the covens up. And he was very busy trying to start covens in lots of parts of Scotland. So come to light in recent years, and this is through research of people like Melissa Symes and and Philip too, and now me a little bit, because I've picked up from Melissa. Same line. She was an initiate of Charles Clark's, and I'm an initiate down line of that. So we've got this interesting story of through Charles Clark to get covens going in Scotland, and there is evidence that he was quite successful at this. So we've got these other lines of the Wicca that are not so well known as the more famous priestesses and other characters in the story, like Doreen, Raybone, Patricia Crowther, Lois Bourne, and other people like that. And then you've got this sort of pocket of witchcraft in Scotland where covens up there, and we've got lists of names, which of course I won't be revealing because that would be not correct, not right. But there are lists of names of people that I'm trying to track down, and I'm certain that there is a whole structure of covens and witchcraft in Scotland that's not been reckoned. I know some of them, but there are others, and it's quite an interesting area. And of course, because Charles Clark being so early in the craft, he plays an interesting role a couple of times in some aspects of how the craft developed. Insight into it. I mean, you know what I'm hinting at, of course. I'm talking about his pseudonym of Mr. Q. Well, do you want me to expand on that? Is that what you're?
Oh, no. I was just listening in. I was just thinking that there's probably. I'm sure that there are probably some lines off of Gerald, or maybe other lines that just, I mean, you know how Gerald was. Gerald was kind of like he wanted to be in the spotlight, and other people were kind of like pulling at his coattails, going, "Hey, let's not just try to go out there and and get the attention." And I think Gerald was kind of like one of those people who he wanted to do that very much.
Yeah, and I think that's characteristic of the story. I mean, Clark started a couple of covens. There's a Glasgow coven and there's a Perth coven, and in both of those cases, there are people that came in, initiates that came in, who, from the documents and the correspondence, you can see that they pretty quickly realised that Gerald was the real sort of treasure pot to get to, and they kind of tried to bypass Charles Clark. It's not unknown, and it's not something that's revealing anything that people aren't aware of. But there's a particularly famous pair of initiates from the Perth coven of Charles Clark, who found a way, bypassed him, went straight to Gerald, and continued their craft career with Gerald. And I'm talking about Monique Wilson and husband Campbell Wilson, Monique and Scotty. According to the evidence that we've got, they were initiated by Clark. Told Gerald he didn't think they were suitable to progress. Unbeknownst to him, they'd gone straight to Gerald, and Gerald did indeed progress them. And as most American followers of Wicca are aware, the Wilsons went on to initiate Ray Buckland, and Ray and his wife Rosemary more or less took that form of British witchcraft across to America. So the Wilsons are quite well known, as is Ray, and they come from Charles's line, not from Gerald's line. Although if you ask Monique, she wouldn't say so. So there's that's another, and the same thing happened to him in Glasgow, and the high priestess of the Glasgow coven is very shortly writing to Gerald, saying, "Look, this Clark guy, can we just ignore him, and can I just come directly over to the island and work with you?" And of course, Gerald is not immune to the charms of anybody who's ready to butter him up and flatter him like that. And that's what happened. So there's this kind of interesting interplay with Clark writing to Gerald to say, these people are not doing the right thing, and they're writing to Gerald saying, "This Clark is over us, and we need to come and see you, Gerald." And there's one point in history where I think Gerald must have dreaded the postman arriving, because the letter. This is Gerald up in the Isle of Man, and meanwhile his own coven that he started and formed down south in Hertford are subject to a variety of new high priestesses introduced by Gerald. This is after Doreen's departure. Everybody was squabbling with everybody, and poor old Gerald was right in the middle of it. Now there is a little tiny bit of me that thinks that perhaps Gerald rather enjoyed that, got some, I don't think he got any pleasure out of people being upset and unhappy with each other, but there's a bit of it where, you know, there was this whole storm going on. Everybody was fighting with everybody, and he was right in the center. They were all kind of appealing to Gerald for, Gerald, this person's dreadful, you mustn't mix with them anymore. There's quite a few of those letters, and some of the stuff gets quite lurid, and there's some pretty hefty allegations going about the way that people behaved. And after that, the result of that is that after Gerald's death, Charles Clark announced his resignation from craft. It's a strange concept to go underground. And what we've discovered is that he did, but he didn't stop practicing witchcraft. And he did form other covens later. And I've got some very good cousins in the craft who were initiates of Charles Clark's from the 1970s, 1990s, right at the end of Clark's life. He initiated partner David, who's passed away, and they started a line of their own, I suppose, or they carried on the Clark line, which is where we are here in Nottingham. So there's this, goes around in a big family circle. So I'm interested from my craft point of view, from my lineage point of view, but I've also got the foundation's archives, and I've got the benefit of other people to talk to, other craft historians, and we keep digging up these interesting things, and Clark's got some good bits to the story, even if you're not really as interested as I am from my point of view.
Yeah.
Tell you what they are now, do you?
Oh, sure. And then one thing I just wanted to comment on. I just wanted to say that even today we still have drama, you know, in our communities. But there's also, we have these people who are kind of like yourself and some other people who are like out. They know, you know, they're kind of like, people know about them. They know their name. But then there's also these other people who are in the background who, you know, that aren't so well known, who played very instrumental roles in the development of the craft itself and some other things. And we even have it today where there are people who are kind of like the face of their tradition or their path, or, you know, that form of paganism. And then you have a lot of the people who are in the background doing the work. They're, you know, or maybe they're just as important, but they're not really seen as much. And I think that we're beginning now to see a lot of these people who were in the background, you know, not just Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente and some of the other well-known people. There's other people too.
I think the craft is a great leveler. I'm happy to say that. I think that brothers and sisters are brothers and sisters. The reason, or one of the reasons why pagans often work in circles, is because in a circle, nobody's at the top.
Right.
You know, everybody had this quality to that. And, you know, the coven structure works because everybody contributes. You know, it's not the craft, the way that Gerald put it over and the way that it is still practiced today is not specifically a congregation and priesthood with somebody lording it over anybody else. In fact, I think that's one of the appeals of many of the modern pagan traditions, is that, you know, being a mystery religion, once you are, let's use this phrase, initiated into the mysteries, once you're aware of how that had that experience, understand better how you relate to everybody else around you. And maybe in some ways that tends to lend itself to being more respectful of everybody else's opinions and position. And there's no question that pulling together like that is, it doesn't, I mean, John Bell and Payne's, I put it on the exhibition title board when you go into Preston Manor, and it says at the bottom a quote that John used to, I don't know where the quote comes from, but John used to say, it doesn't matter who does the work, regardless of who takes credit, as long as the work gets done, the work is much more important than whoever did it.
Yeah.
I think that's true. So,
yeah, and I think that's excuse me, that's one of the other things that I sometimes encounter with definitely people on the outside, but even people within our own community, is they don't understand that the secretive part of it, that part of the mysteries itself. And maybe you have a good way to describe it, but the way that I describe it is that instead of, like, you know, you go and you join a church and you become indoctrinated into that particular religion and you follow that religion, and then you kind of like, you follow the way that other people have done it in the past. Whereas in mystery traditions, it's your experience in it that is so important. And that's why it has to remain hidden and in shadow, in mystery, because it is part of your experiencing your development. It's like the difference between somebody describing a sunset to you and you actually experiencing a sunset. That's how I've described it, you know.
You suggested I might have a good description, but that's the same as mine. I think that's exactly right. It's experiential, and that experience of that is not one that you can share with somebody else. You know, I mean, I know Doreen once said there's no secrets for the craft ever escaping, because outside of the craft, because you cannot know the secrets until you've experienced the secrets, which you can't know until you're in. So right. I mean, there's a kind of natural thing. I mean, I know that there are obviously there's like to witchcraft, the so-called books of shadows, many of which Gerald compiled and Doreen, as we know, historically added to. And obviously I'm on the kind of edge of being careful about how I describe what we know about that. And I know others will step further than I will. Others will, you know, recoil in horror that Ashley Mortimer is telling the secrets of the craft. But I mean, you know, there are bits of our history that it does public domain, that Gerald Gardner is a figure of history who's been, in my opinion, greatly maligned for lots of reasons. And the best way to understand Gerald is to be honest about his history. So you can describe the way in which the books of shadows were constructed by Gerald, what he was doing and why he was writing them and how he was going about it, without revealing the secrets of their contents. Mm-hmm. And Doreen took no problem at all. I mean, as we know very famously, Doreen worked with Stuart Farrar and Janet Farrar to help them to publish books like The Witcher's Bible and the books like that did give of the rituals that could be used by other people who were not necessarily initiates. They published those books. I mean, I think Doreen hedged her bets a bit. I think she realized somebody was going to publish. Right. And when Stuart came along, I think she thought it might as well be him as anybody else. He seems like a sensible chap who's going to do the right thing. And of course, the correspondence that we have still in the archive today, I think she wanted to see it done as a good job and not done by somebody who'd got motives for other motives. I think those rituals are published. They are there. There's no doctrine or dogma in the craft to say that there is only one way of doing anything and there's only one ritual for this or one ritual for that. So, you know, and Doreen's work, Doreen's books of shadows, of which there's quite a number. There's more than dozens actually in the collection, in the archive, and all of them are different. Mm-hmm. You know, it's still the same craft. It's still the same Doreen Valiente craft, but they give the details of the mechanics of practicing the rituals differently in each of them. And the craft's an evolving thing. I think if you get stuck in that kind of dogmatic sort of this is the scripture and it must never ever be changed, that's a recipe for a religion that's going to die out. Right. Yeah. Yeah. However, you can't make changes to it. You know, I mean, you can't make changes to something wholesale without knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it, without being inspired in the right way to do so. You know, and I'm trying to think of an read a very interesting book written by a Catholic priest actually, who spent a lot of time on the reservations in North America, in Dakota. North Dakota, actually, the lodge ceremonies, the traditional ceremonies, and he came to the conclusion that tradition was a malleable thing. Tradition didn't mean doing the same thing generation after generation. Tradition was about something that is capable of evolving. And one of the tiny examples I remember, which I thought was a really good one, he was talking about the evolution of the way that water is brought into the lodge for a sweat, and it would be carried in a buffalo skin or a bison skin. But nowadays, a lot of the lodge people running the lodges will carry their water in a plastic bucket, and they don't see any problem with that at all. It isn't breaking tradition. They moved on because the important part of the ritual is getting water into the lodge. It's not, you know, the device that's carrying it. But you would take somebody who was very deeply versed in the mysteries to understand why it was okay to, if you see what I mean. And I think the same goes with the craft, witchcraft. I'm quite happy for lots of pagans around the world to work their own rituals, and indeed Gerald encouraged people to do that. But you know, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to kind of, like you say, you have to be immersed in the experience of in the practice of the craft in order to start tweaking with the way it's done. And the bottom line about one of the important reasons that Wicca grew the way it did is because it works.
Right.
You get results. Doreen always said that. Kind of, it's a proven developing your spiritual connection with the goddess and the god. And it just works. So, you know, if there's a formula that works, there's not really, you have to have a very good reason to vary it.
Yeah, the way that I kind of look at it as in cooking, let's say, for example, once you know the rules and the recipes and the way things work, you know, adding certain, processes of cooking, once you know those rules, then you can start breaking them. And that's kind of the way that I see Wicca and definitely occult practices, but that's a separate thing from Wicca. But I think that once you know sort of the rules, how things are, I think then you can start breaking those rules because you kind of know the actual mechanics of it.
You're right. I mean, if you asked 10 different chefs to cook a lasagna, you'd get 10 lasagnas. They'd still be lasagnas, but they'd all be a little different.
Right.
You might follow some bits of it that they wouldn't vary. Might be interesting to find that they would. But, and I think that's true of ritual. And Gerald was highly. I mean, it'd be really wrong to make Gerald's rituals doctrinal because they changed and evolved as well as we're able to study by looking at the different books that he was writing in and the different ways he was writing essentially the same rituals at different points in his life.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can look at those early books of shadows, as Gerald called them, and you can look at what Doreen did with them and how she changed them and how she structured it, added her own inspirational stuff into it. And you can see how it evolved then. And then really interestingly, that the later Gerald books, which still exist as well, they kind of, that's Gerald having got the benefit of what Doreen's done that he likes. He then starts rewriting and twisting and tweaking with it again. But he keeps the bits. And craft historians will be aware of this nomenclature that's come about: text A, text B, text C, right, text D, and so on. And you can see the development of, I mean, I hear people talk about the Book of Shadows.
Right. Right.
Yours, mine, Doreen's, Gerald's. Gerald's at that date. Gerald's at the. I mean, we just got to be honest about these things, and it's okay. I think it's okay to talk about that without going into too much detail. And I know that somebody recently asked the question, "What's the difference between text A, B, C, and D?"
Oh, it's a good question. I was just saying that is a good
the
question.
Brief, short. Yeah, the bluffer's answer, the simple answer. I like to understand things because I'm quite a simpleton. Is that text A is what Doreen referred to as Gerald's old Book of Shadows, and that is the one that Doreen had in the collection and it remains in the Doreen Valiente collection. Text A is the book that Gerald was writing in somewhere in the late 40s, just before he kind of broke away properly from the New Forest group that he was working with, who brought him in and taught him the craft.
You mean
formed his own
B or text A? Okay.
And there is another book that is known as Ye Bok, or Ye Bok of Ye Art Magical, which is also Gerald's magical writings, which some say predates text A, on the basis that it contains quite a lot more ritual magic that's from medieval grimoire type high magic, temple magic. And it was at the time before Gerald really got excited enough about the craft to want to work rituals for the craft specifically and only. And then after text A, describes as text B. And text B comes from correspondence between Doreen and the Farrars when she is describing to them the era in which rituals were written. And Doreen describes text B rituals as being the writings of the craft that Gerald was producing by the time she met him, 8 or 9 years later, after he'd been running his own coven and doing other things in the late 40s and the early 1950s. So text B is what the rituals as Gerald was using them when Doreen encountered him. So that would be 1952, 53. famously, Gerald threw the old book at her across the circle and said, "If you can do any better, have a go." And she said she would. And she said,
took it on.
You know, I mean, that's not a figure of speech. Doreen says he literally chucked the book at her and said, "If you can do any better."
Wow.
And she said he had this old book that he had at the altar that contained these rituals, and he told her it was of ancient provenance and came from the deep past. And she said, "Well, I knew it wasn't, because I recognized some of the words and the writings. I recognized Crowley, and I recognized bits of Charles Leland and other characters like that whose writings were in there." So she knew that Gerald, and he had to admit to her after that, after she kind of rumbled him, he had to admit to her that he'd added to the rituals that he'd been given, because it wasn't in a very a written form, and he was trying to make it a written way of describing the craft. As we know, she produced these wonderful pieces of Wiccan litany, like the Charge of the Goddess and some of the other poetic bits, and some of the other bits that people outside of the craft won't know about, but written by Doreen. And so the incarnation of the Book of Shadows is what's referred to as text C. C is what Doreen did to text B and text A. So text C is embodied. Text B doesn't really exist in a single document. There's no book that we would refer to as text B. That they are rituals that are often written by Gerald in handwriting. Gerald typed rituals with handwritten amendments, different versions, slightly altered to each other, and so on. Text C does exist in a book. It's Doreen's Blue Book. Blue Book is the one I mentioned earlier in this interview. The Blue Book is the one where Doreen really is working on those rituals of Gerald's and working them up into a more logical and organized format. So text, if you were to look at Wiccan practices, modern Wiccan initiated Gardnerian witches practices, closest that you would get to I'm going to say in inverted commas, a scripture of that. And then text D is what happened afterwards when Gerald got copies of text C from Doreen and was presumably pleased with what she'd done and the way that she changed things. And text D is his copies of that. And Gerald, and I have to say kindly to Gerald, they aren't exact copies, and he didn't kind of just swallow everything that Doreen gave him. He took it and put his own slant back on that again. And you know, there are common threads, and as you know, and Kelly have analysed these to the nth degree, and others, as you know, other historians of the craft have carried on that work and done or redone it and done things like that. And you can find these common threads that run, but essentially that nomenclature is that's what those books are. There are later do other things after she'd broken away with Gerald. She was working with other covens, as you know, she was in covens with Robert Cochrane. She was also involved with the Atho people, and there are books of shadows of Doreen from that period. And then there are later books of shadows that Doreen kind of revisited the material and reorganized it again in different ways. So you've got Gerald in different eras writing different things. So no one could really point to the scripture of Wicca and say, oh, these are Gerald Gardner's words and they've never been altered. Well, Gerald altered them frequently.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, I don't know. Are you about to sort of recoil in horror and pronounce me heretic now? For daring to say that?
No, I don't think so. No, I'm not going to label you as a heretic. I think, like I said, I'm interested in the history, and that's just how I look at it. I try not to put judgments on the way that things have developed. I just think it's really interesting how it's all developed, you know.
I mean, has your practice developed in the time that you've been a pagan? I mean, have you changed in the way you do things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When I first started, you know, we had basically the Janet and Stewart for Artists book. That's what we used. And we basically practiced out of that book. And we then put our own spin on it. And I'm talking about we, as in this is 1986, 87. Me and some friends of mine, we basically just started a coven. And then when that group broke up, I had my own practice, and I I developed it, you know. It evolved with me. And then most recently, I'd say probably about 5-6 years ago, I joined a Gardnerian group and was initiated into that. But, and so there is, yeah. So, I mean, I probably have the same thing like Doreen. I have like, I don't know, like 20 books of shadows. I mean, it's just like, there's all these various developments, you know?
Yeah, a similar story. I was interested and involved in paganism for donkey's years, many years before I got, before I became an initiate. And part of my initiate journey, obviously, I'd be careful about oath-bound stuff, but
right.
Part of my
journey is public, so
it wasn't really. In some ways, it was revisiting some of the basic practices and the basic ideas and relearning things in a different way. I'd be lying if I said that it was all alien to me. You know, there were certain things that I was taught and shown when I became an initiate that I knew a bit about, or I was aware of that. Yeah, that's how that works, is it? That's what it really means. Oh, I see. Because, you know, I mean, it's no secret that there are people out there who are putting stuff online, claiming that it's craft secrets and things. And they're not the secrets of the craft. And often these texts, even where they've picked up snippets that are genuinely bits that are written by Gerald, they've missed the point, or they've misspelled, or it's not properly quoted, like that, where, right. You know, it isn't. And of course, as you know, we've talked about this before, you know, if you're in the craft and you've taken an oath of secrecy, then the oath is the oath. And the way that you deal with that is deny with anybody. If somebody came to me and said, can you tell me if this is genuinely the material from the Wiccan secret book of shadows, I wouldn't tell them one way or another.
Right.
What they showed me could be, you know, it could be Tolstoy, it could be the Bible, it could be, you know, Donald Trump's election campaign, but I wouldn't confirm or deny either way, whether it's in the book of shadows.
Let's hope it's not.
If you as a non-initiate wish to believe Donald Trump's election manifesto forms part of the book of shadows, I can't confirm or deny that. Sorry. It might do.
It is true. I think that I think there was one story that either you shared or somebody shared with me where Doreen had met someone who was from America who had shared a piece of liturgy with Doreen, and basically it was a piece of liturgy that Doreen had written. And this person was claiming that this had gone back like to their great grandmother, and it was part of this ancient practice. And Doreen is just kind of like shaking her head, going, "Uh-huh." Mm-hmm. And the person didn't know that she actually wrote it.
Doreen, there's some correspondence between Doreen and her publisher regarding another publisher who I won't mention probably at the moment, but the letters are. If you ever wanted to have a lesson in how to write a very polite but very pointed, snotty letter complaining about someone plagiarizing your work, you could take that letter of Doreen's as a template, because she did discover that there was a published book claiming to be an ancient grimoire material, and she writes things to her. I can't remember the exact phraseology. It's just beautiful. She'll say things like and it claims on page 69 and again on page 72,
right,
that this material was handed down providence. I know perfectly well that it wasn't. It was published in this magazine, whatever, not the Wiccan, whatever magazine it was, in 1975, under my name, under my copyright. And the reason it was done so is because I wrote it. So it couldn't possibly have been handed down by someone's grandmother who died before I was born. Your author appears to think that, and so on, and it goes on. And it really is a bit of a destruction. And I don't think she was trying to do that. I think she was annoyed. Doreen asserted copyright in the material that she wrote. But, you know, that didn't mean that she didn't want other people to use it. And again, that's another question I've been asked about is it okay to use Doreen's material to write it and put it on the internet? And the answer is that we've allowed quite a bit of well-known Doreen material, including things like Doreen's verse, which is, as far as the Charge of the Goddess goes, Doreen's is the original. And I don't mean to say that Doreen wrote it all completely, but she claimed copyright in it herself. She published it in her published books. The copyright in that is goes out as what we call a Creative Commons license, which basically means everyone can use it, everyone can share it, everyone can enjoy it, everyone can copy it and you know, publish it elsewhere, but not for money. So if you put it on your website and say, with credit to Doreen, this is Doreen Valiente's Charge of the Goddess, no problem. Use it in your coven, great, no problem. Use it in your public rituals. As soon as money gets involved, as soon as you put a book together that's got that in there, then you're selling that book for money.
Right.
So that's the answer. That's sort of two answers in one, about the copyright of that material and about Doreen's practice. I've got sidetracked. I can't remember the original question now.
That's okay. That's okay. I know that one of the things that I wonder how many, of course, but this gets into the denying or confirming part, but I wonder how many people realize that some of the material that is out there, not all of it, but some of it is actually attributed to Doreen, but they think that it is attributed to, you know, like the Green Egg magazine, or they believe it's contributed. It's actually somebody else's because somebody else claimed it, and so they put it into their format, let's say their public ritual format, and then it just kind of like developed that way, but Doreen never got credit for it. You know what I mean? So it slipped in there because it was part of their liturgy, and then but Doreen never really got credit for it. Because I'm sure that there are books that are sold that have Doreen's material in there, you know.
I'm quite certain that there are, and I'm sure that's true, and I'm sure it doesn't, unless somebody ripped the whole thing off. I don't think it matters that much. It becomes a matter of history. I mean, obviously, copyright goes out after 70 years after the author's death, and it's the same in most countries around the world. I mean, I know that there's going to be some fun and games in a certain other occult community, because Aleister Crowley's death 70-year anniversary is coming up in a couple of years, and it won't be that many more years before Gerald's comes up as well. So, you know, the question of legal copyright goes out the window a bit there. But it does strike me that if you are part of a secret an organization that maintains oath-bound secrets about the material, then you've got a bit of a problem when somebody out there you know, copies your material and plagiarizes it, because by standing up and saying, hey, that's my material, you're effectively breaking your own oaths, aren't you?
Right. That's true.
So you're a bit stuck with that. But then the point with Doreen and Gerald too, with the material that is part of the Wiccan craft litany, and the material that's what we'd call the Book of Shadows material, is that it was never really intended for publication. It was never intended to be a copyright to defend. It was intended for use of the craft and used by people in the craft who know what it means and how to use it. And, you know, I don't know, how can I say this? It strikes me that quite a lot of the material in the Book of Shadows that I have, in the hands of somebody who didn't know what I know and hadn't had the experience that I'd had as an initiate, it wouldn't really mean anything like the same thing. It wouldn't have the same function. It doesn't fulfill the function, because the words aren't the important bit. It's the way in which it works.
Right.
You know, and interesting looking at Gerald's writing of rituals, and I don't just mean witchcraft, oathbound Book of Shadows rituals. Gerald's ritual writings evolve, and one of the things that's kind of noticeable is that some of the very early rituals, particularly some of the very early stuff, there's not a lot of stage direction, or there's not a lot of it doesn't strike one as something that's been written by somebody who's been practicing those rituals for many years. It strikes you as somebody who's got it in their head as to how those rituals might go. But later you start to see more Gerald amending things and it becomes the work of somebody who's been working these rituals, somebody who's been doing this. That, I don't know, I'm trying to give you a sort of silly example. I know any pagan out there will nod their head and smile when they hear this, but, you know, it's no good writing a ritual that says, read this script,
right,
and then light the candle. You know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
right?
I know what you mean.
There's a sort of practicality to ritual that you know, you can't ignore. And if a ritual is beautiful and it works properly, that all falls into place. The words sit right with the way that the actions go and who does what and who says what next. But if it's not, you know, if you've just got things that written down, you know, and so quite a lot of Gerald's stuff is scant enough in that respect that you can see how as soon as it's passed on to somebody else, it's going to evolve because somebody else will do it differently.
Right. I was just going to mention, I was going to say, like, you can read a ritual format. You can read the litany part of it. But then when you actually are in a part of a group that is practicing, it's quite different because there are elements that may slip in there that weren't part of that litany. Or it, you know, I mean, it's just, I think it comes back to that experiencing the mysteries part. It's like you can read it, you can have an understanding of it, and you can even memorize the script. But until you actually go into the group and you experience it for yourself over a period of time, it's very different. I don't know exactly, I'm sure you understand, but I'm trying to kind of like convey it to people who may have never experienced something like this. But there's no, the litany part of it, the words, the script is kind of secondary. Really the experience is actually being in the group and experiencing it. You know, I mean, I think you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. And I think that's not just true of initiates. That's, you know, I mean, initiates relate specifically to the Doreen and Gerald Wicca material.
Mm-hmm.
It's to that don't come over in the in any part of that may or may not be in the public domain that people have read. You know, I mean, it's not really a secret of the craft that some of the stuff that Doreen, stuff that relates to craft practices. You know, I mean, she said so. It's not a secret. But the way in which that conveys itself to somebody who's had an initiatory journey and the experience of the mysteries, it's a different meaning. It feels different. But to any pagan as well, the same thing, you know, something written down as opposed to something that you've experienced. And even if it's the simplest of incantations, the simplest invocation, your understanding of it, your connection to it is totally different depending on your experience. You know, I mean, I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but I know that there are certain passages that every pagan knows that I heard, you know, on the night of the full moon when I was with my friends. We traveled a long way. It was a long night. We got to this place we'd never been to before, met these other people. We had a fantastic fire and a great party afterwards. And it was a really powerful ritual that night, the particular way the sea was crashing against the rocks and so on. And you remember that piece from that experience of it, totally different to the way you remember, you know, the same piece if you read it on your Kindle on the bus one morning on the way to work.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? You know, it's that experience. And I think that must be true of everything else. You know, if you'd had your car stolen and your wife had run off with your best friend and your dog had died and you went to see a Shakespeare play, you might feel
that sounds like a country and western song.
It's got all the, yeah, it's got all the features of a country and western song, all the bits combined, hasn't it? Yeah, you know, you missed out the bit about trains and prisons probably, but yeah, then you've got the complete country and western folk. I don't wish to deride. I like country music, and I don't have a problem with singing about and celebrating what you know and what you're about. But what I'm saying is that your experience of something on that day would be different again. So you know, I hate Shakespeare. The only time I ever saw a Shakespeare play was the day that everything else went wrong and I was in a bad mood. You know, I mean, it affects things like that. So the same's true of the material, although there is, as you know, as a crafter, as an initiate of the craft, your experience of certain aspects of some of the rituals that are common to everybody who's in the craft, the Gardnerian craft, shall we say, you know, there's a certain commonality, and you meet other people, and it's amazing how often you find that your experience of the mystery does ring a bell with them, in a way that you kind of go, you know, when you hear that piece, don't you feel like this? And they say, yeah, and don't you get that? Yeah. And you have that common sharing. So, I mean, one of the things to me that says about why I think witchcraft practiced in an initiatory way is wonderful is because there's something in the mystery of it that gives you a commonality of experience. And to me, that gives it an authenticity. You know, it because we both felt the same thing, having experienced something on different occasions in different places, You know, I mean, you can say things to me like, you know what I mean, don't you? And I do.
Right.
Because we both aware that we've encountered some of this stuff in that same way, and that encounter with the mysteries in the way in which it's presented and performed within the initiated craft. There's a commonality to it, even if your coven does it differently to mine.
Right. Right.
Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you, and that is one of the other things that. How's your time doing? Because we're coming on a little over an hour. Are you okay to continue
I'm okay
on some
for a few
more?
minutes, yeah.
All right.
I'm
Okay.
happy to go on some more. You may have to edit it up. I can't imagine that any poor bastard out there is going to watch all. Oh no, I've done it. I've sworn. I promised not to swear.
like I said, you can swear. That's okay. Just just watch out. Charlie's right behind you with the axe. So
yeah, the monkey is sitting in the back of the room there with watching.
He's got his eye on you. So
yeah, I'm being watched from a lot of places at the moment. I mean, I've become very conscious of that in the last few months, craft-wise, foundation-wise, and the monkey, of course. And you just made me think of that when we were. Funny enough, as I was saying that thing about people who have had a common experience or a common emotion coming from an experience that like a ritual or whatever. I mean, I'm going to made me think of Patricia Crowther. I'm going to see Patricia tomorrow. I haven't seen her for a few weeks, and I'm looking forward to it. And she always says to me at some point, when I see her, she always says, "It's wonderful, isn't it? The craft is wonderful. The way that, you know, I did something ago, and you're doing it today, and we both got the same thing from it, or we got something from it that we've shared. It's wonderful, marvelous." And you know what? It's one of those things that people say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful that this happens and that?" But when she said it, it kind of rings home. I get that, and I think like that. I think that as a practitioner of witchcraft today, and I don't just mean initiates now. I mean the thought that there are pagans out there gathering in circles at Sabbats and celebrating things and using, shall we say, whether it be verbal, written, or the idea or the current of it, that people like Gerald and Doreen, and then our ancestors long before that, had a similar common thread of connection to the spiritual energies that we're dealing with. And I think it is a wonderful thing. I think it's a marvelous, magical, exciting thing that we've got something in common with our deepest ancestors.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that I'm full of mirth, maybe not as much reverence. My mirth reverence ratio is probably not the same as everybody else's. Huh? But the bits where it does catch. But, you know, there are bits like that where it gets me. I feel emotional. I feel connected to my ancestors. And I don't just mean strings of initiates going back. I'm saying this carefully, strings of initiates that go back before Gerald Gardner. I'm talking about that common sort of thread of humanity. And, you know, as people of faith, we're finding things that we have in common, and some of us specifically in common. I mean, you and I have narrowed it down in this conversation, talked a lot about Gardnerian initiates. And I really hope that doesn't come over as if there's only the only thing that matters to us, because it doesn't. The wider pagan community and the wider connection with the gods matter. And, you know, as I'm very fond of saying which does prick the bubble of people who can be a bit doctrinal. I love to say that Gerald Gardner was not a Gardnerian.
Right.
And really, neither really was Doreen Valiente. But then, I've got Christian friends who are very quick to say Jesus Christ was not a Christian. Jesus was a Jew, actually. You know, that kind of, it doesn't matter. What matters is what happens on the spiritual planes, on the astral plane, what happens with an individual's connection to deity and divinity. And if we and the rest of the pagan community can help other people who have got an inclination to connect that way, to find a path that suits them to do it, then we're doing something good for the rest of the community. And just because we have our own, you know, mystery tradition, our own secret initiatory path to follow as well, we do, and it doesn't mean that's the only thing that matters to us, you know.
You know, actually, something just came to my mind, and I think I'm going to ask you this question. If somebody came to you, like, let's say they're just searching for whatever, they don't know what they want to be. Maybe they want to be a Hindu, a Christian, a Wiccan, a pagan. They don't know what they want to do, and they asked you, you know, like, how do I get involved in paganism or Wicca or any kind of spirituality, what would you say to them?
I mean, it's a standard answer. It's not a very exciting one. First of all, read books. Read books. Read lots of books. Read the internet, and don't believe a word of any of it in any of them. Get that wider opinion. Get the wider thing you can find. There's a couple of books on that I like to recommend. I mean, I always recommend Doreen if anybody's interested in witchcraft. Can't really go wrong with Doreen. There's a guy called Pete Jennings who was president of the Pagan Federation for a bit. And Pete wrote a book called Pagan Paths. Brief description of quite a number of modern pagan traditions and paths. So I would say to anybody seeking, be aware that the internet is full of people who are writing things because it's their slant for a reason. There's an agenda going on.
Right.
People who want to set themselves up as gurus, people who are, you know, in and it's a sliding scale, but people who are abusive to others in one way or another.
Yeah.
So you've got to be aware of that, but take it all in, take everything in, and then start to mix with other pagans. I've got some Christian friends who find the weirdest and hardest thing to handle about pagans is that they think we're on some kind of secret recruitment drive. They find it really strange when they say, you know, your religion, this, you know, Wicca, Gardnerian witchcraft. Yep. They say, you know, you're trying to recruit us, aren't you? You're trying to convert us. No. The point of one of the points of traditions like the Gardnerian craft is it's there for the seekers to find if they're seeking and they're genuine, but it's not to pull in recruits. And they're like, it must be. No, that's something
they can't understand that.
You know,
yeah,
it's a trick.
Yeah.
They find that really hard.
Yeah, because that's why I asked you that question.
My advice is mixed up.
What was that?
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. You were leading me to that answer, were you? You were leading me to that bit, were you?
Yeah, it's interesting because that is because I've had kind of people ask me, like, how do I get involved in this? How do I find that? And my answer basically is very similar to yours. I tell them, go out, read, and find what it is that you want to find. And they're kind of shocked that I'm not like trying to get them into Wicca, because that is not what I want.
No, they can't.
Yeah.
That's a real, I mean, you, especially some parts of America, you guys have got that much worse than us. You were saying earlier about that kind of, we're the secret satanic cult that can't wait to drink your blood and, you know, and sacrifice your children. And they do, people out there find it very, very, very hard to understand that we're not actually bothered whether you join or not.
Right.
Now, I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean we don't have feelings or we don't care about other people, but I am not excited particularly to see thousands and thousands of people find their way to Wicca. You know, if somebody who is a genuine seeker, who has identified within themselves that they're interested, then, you know, you can help them. But the other thing, as well as reading books, that I'd say to anybody out there who considers themselves a solitary practitioner or a beginner or whatever, is get involved with a reputable moot, a group that meets up in a social regularly, and they're easy to find on the internet. And you know, and the moot scene, particularly the Pagan Federation, is still very strong. You'd be struggling to go to a city in the UK and not be able to find a pagan moot that's well advertised. They've got a Facebook page, probably a website. They meet in a public place. You know, the usual common sense, I guess, to some extent, dating rules apply. You know, don't go and meet somebody, a stranger. Don't give them your phone number until you've actually met them, and you know, that sort of thing. All those kind of sensible personal safety things. But most reputable pagan organizations hold social gatherings where you are able to mix with other pagans and ask these questions. And my experience of those gatherings is, by and large, with very, very few exceptions, they're a very open place where no question is a silly question. To people who are new on the path and seeking it. You know, and I do think it's a truth that the longer you spend being a pagan and working in the craft and working magic, the more you realize how little you know. You know, people say, oh, you must be very advanced after 20 years. Yeah, I've come a long way, but, you know, the mountains behind me that I've climbed, there's still a load of big ones in front. And, you know, they're even bigger, and it widens your horizons. So there is no such thing as a silly question. And I was taught long ago not to hesitate to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not frightened. And not that I'm trying to say that I'm a great experienced pagan or anything, but, you know, if people ask me my opinion, sometimes I have to say, I'm sorry, can I stop you? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anything about that particular topic.
Right.
So I know. I mean, if I'll be honest with you, if it's crystals or I'm not so bad with tarot, but crystals, tarot, or say Enochian magic, my expert, I've got a go-to person for all of those. There's someone I know who's good at that, and I'll say, well, you should see them really, because if you wanted to ask me about the history of the craft, the Book of Shadows, and that sort of thing, or how pagans in the community operate and that kind of thing, I'm okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you want weird, frightening, crazy, strange, odd ritual initiatory practices, then you should see the monkey.
The monkey's got those super weird rituals.
Yeah,
but I agree with you. I don't think that everybody doesn't know everything. It's just the way it is, you know. And it seems like, kind of like what you had just said, it's like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. It's kind of like, and there are areas like yourself. I'm not very good with tarot, but I know some people who are very good with tarot, you know. And there are people who have knowledge in this area that I'm just not that familiar with. And I'm hesitant when I hear somebody say that they know everything and they know this and they know that. It's kind of like, do you really, or you just kind of, you think you know that?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to say, Ashley, what's your expertise? What's your field of expertise? I'm an expert on not knowing much about anything. But importantly, I do. I mean, one of the things for me is one of the things that fulfills and satisfies me, and it's been the same in all walks of my life, is I like knowing a little bit about everything. I like knowing enough to be able to have a conversation with somebody politely about a subject. And then if I don't know, I can go and find some. And of course, the way things have worked out with the foundation and the craft, I mean, the craft's great for that as well, because you always know somebody who probably is an expert on that subject, you know. So it's, I mean, there are a couple of people, I suppose they'd mind being named, but people like, I don't know, if you said to me, find somebody who knows about Enochian magic, I'd point you in the direction of Rufus Barrington. To talk about, if you wanted to talk about, there's some names I won't name, but there you go. Rufus is a Enochian expert. Philip Heselton is still craft historian expert in my book, and you know that it's horses for courses, but that to be an expert on everything. I was at some friends. We were at a seminar at an event recently where there were workshops and talks about these things, and they were talking about the role of the high priestess in the coven. And one of the things that they were saying was that it's not the high priestess's job to be the expert in every aspect of the craft and every aspect of the magic. It really isn't, you know. So it's the high priestess's job to help her coven mates to know where to look to find the answers to the questions they're seeking. And I think the same is true of anybody in paganism. You know, you've got a kind of, I think, a spiritual and moral obligation to, having gained something out of it yourself, to be able to pass that ability to find what you're seeking for onto other people. And if that means just pointing them in a direction of a book or another person or whatever. And that's why the moots are so important, because if you go to a pagan moot, you're almost certainly going to encounter people of different walks of pagan life and people who've got knowledge about different things. You know, I mean, there's a particular chap at our local moot that's organised by Nottingham Pagan Network, who, anybody asks anything about Egypt, ancient Egypt or Egyptian magic, he's your man. And you know, I know that my friends poke a bit of fun at me. They say, you know, come to our moot, but don't be mentioning Gardnerian witchcraft history if you don't want Ashley to rabbit on for about an hour. Wide variety of things, and the moots are a really good place. I've helped a lot of people, and I know John Payne particularly helped a lot of people to find their way to a local group who they didn't know, you know, were going to help them, but who were suitable for them. And you know, we've done it across the internet. People in America have helped my friends, and you know, I know of people who have helped Americans to find their way to a local moot, and joyfully in one particular case into the craft as well, which was quite good. But you know, that's how it is. That pagans are should be there for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Our community should be there to help each other in a safe and sensible environment.
Definitely, definitely. And Gerald Gardner's birthday is coming up soon, right?
I say it every year when it comes to this part of June. I always say he's 11. People say, how old is he? I always say, old Gerald's 11-1 again, because that's the quote. That's the, you know what I'm talking about. That's the reference from the Lord of the Rings from old Bilbo. Gerald would have been 132 this year.
Oh wow!
And you know, if you read Philip Heselton's books, you'll realise that the date of the 13th of June is quite significant in Doreen's life, and it's got a few little funny bits to it. I'm sure we all have those, but we're a bit late. We're celebrating Gerald's birthday a bit late this year. We're going, because the exhibition is on at Preston Manor in Brighton. We're going to have a day of talks about Gerald. I'll be speaking a bit more about Books of Shadows, and I'm giving a talk of Gerald's, which I think might be the earliest talk on Wicca that anybody gave after the repeal of the Witchcraft Act. Gerald did, and then there's Philip Cargom, who is head of the OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, which was founded by Gerald's friend Ross Nichols.
Yeah,
Cargom is kind of Ross Nichols' sort of spiritual heir. Philip is coming to give a talk about Ross Nichols. Actually, Philip's talk title has got everything in it. He's going to talk about the kitchen sink and everything. He's a great speaker. And the other speaker is a guy called Tam Campbell. And Tam is well known in the Children of Artemis organisation. Tam gives talks at most of the Children of Artemis events. He does an introduction to Wicca, a sort of Wicca 101 talk. Tam's a very well-known high priest in the craft, and he's very good at talking to people outside of the craft about the craft. So he gives a talk about how Wicca works and what it is and what it does, and I've seen him give the same or a similarly titled talk to initiates too, and he gets into a bit more detail. But so we thought that it's funny how we've talked about how newbies find out about the craft and things. It's going to events like that as well. Go to a talk, and don't be frightened to approach a speaker afterwards. After I've given a talk, particularly if you're clutching beer, then I'm inclined to be forthcoming.
If you got one for you, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm trying to be like the people who I look up to, including John Payne. I try to be human, approachable, and as you know, the craft teaches you to be humble. Being high up in the craft is about being high in service, isn't it? It's a path of service to the gods and to your own spirit and yourself and to the others around you, your brothers and sisters. So I think that and it's true that the most famous and important people I know are always definitely the most humble people I know as well.
Yeah.
Frightened to approach people, and don't be frightened to go and ask questions, and then find somebody who's there's always somebody like me who's willing to help you, who's willing to sort of, after I've given a talk at a conference and they ask me something, I think I don't know the answer, but there's Philip over there, let's go and ask him. And then people are very approachable and knowledgeable, and famous pagans especially. I don't know whether you have that in America. Do you? Is it because we're a small country here and you can actually get up close with the people who have got kind of well-known names and things, or do those people seem a bit further distant when you live miles away from each other?
Well, I think definitely in the UK, I think that it is more of a smaller community. I think there's more of a commonality, and I think that is a part definitely of the UK, that you guys have a little tighter community. Here in America, we're so spread out. You kind of have your gurus on the northern coast, the western coast, then you have your gurus on the eastern coast, and so like some of the
gurus.
Well, I mean,
wow.
Like not really gurus, but like,
no, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean, yeah. So people like who are famous in the craft. So like out here, there's like Starhawk, who I've met, just briefly, but she was very approachable. And I also met people who I would consider to be, like big in the pagan community. The people who I've met have been very very approachable. And then you hear about some people on the East Coast, and I can't speak to that because I've never met them. But I think I'm going to make a pretty general statement, but I think they're almost all approachable. And I think if anybody does get on like a high horse and think that they're, the cat's meow, I think they probably get knocked down off that pretty quick. There was one person, Christopher Penzak, who I just sat next to when I was at PantheaCon. We didn't really talk or anything, but he was just like anybody else. I mean, I looked over and I recognized him. And I was going to say something, but the conference started that we were attending. But he seemed to be just like anybody else, I think. Well,
I mean,
yeah.
The circumstances helped a bit. I mean, it wasn't the purpose of it. When John passed away, we had the onerous task of phoning people up to tell them that John had something similar that he had to do when Doreen died. But I rang up a lot of people who. I mean, I actually commented to my girlfriend. She did a lot of the phoning for me, actually. I was busy emailing and she was phoning. And she said, I've got this list of people to ring tonight, and most of them are on our bookshelves or in our address book. They're not people we know. What do I say? And I said, I think you should just say who you are, and you'll find that they're very approachable. And I think that was it really reminded me just how humble the craft should be, and that people who become famous should be. And I'm glad that's your experience too. Yeah, everybody is approachable, very approachable. And I don't know, the guru thing, I have wondered, people have suggested that one of the reasons that Wicca got so well is because it didn't have a guru.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't doubt that if people had sat around at the feet of Gerald worshipping him as the great guru, I think he might have quite liked that for a bit, but I think he'd have been a very bright flame for a very brief period, like many other cults that have had gurus attached to them. And in fact, the very fact that's not been the way of the craft, whether it's was a little bit, it just wasn't suited to that. And Doreen certainly wasn't. She didn't have any truck with anybody putting her on a pedestal. She hated that and didn't allow people to do that. She was very personable and went out of her way to be. And equally, if you knocked on Doreen's door when the international football match was on, you could forget it. She wouldn't want to answer the door.
Which happened.
She was just like anybody else.
Right.
She was the archetypal lady at the bus stop,
Mm-hmm.
The lady that you met on the bus every morning, and you wouldn't have known that she was a witch unless you knew. And if you knew and asked her about it, she wouldn't have made any. She'd have happily talked to you about that. I've heard from loads of people who met Doreen at some point in their lives when they lived in Brighton, or they've come across her, and they said, I think I met Doreen once, because she was just this nice lady who used to sit and having a cup of coffee in an afternoon and watching the seafront. Right. And I think it was Doreen Valiente, but I couldn't tell because she didn't have a pointy hat on or stripy tights.
Right, and it also takes.
I mean, again,
yeah. And I think it takes two people to do that. It takes, first of all, really that's a projection on our part. We project onto someone else that, they're like they're like high up on the pagan ladder. So, we have to kind of like maybe, they're so whatever. We project that onto them. But then there's other people who they understand that projection, but they kind of like, they don't accept it. They're like, you know what? I'm not that way. Maybe I wrote some books, or maybe I'm famous for this, but really I'm not. I'm just like anybody else. And then you can have people who can use it to their advantage, who will take advantage of it, and they'll say, oh yes, and I know this, I'm the expert on that. So it really kind of takes two people to have that sort of guru energy, or whatever you want to call it, that guru atmosphere to happen. And I think that pagans are aware of that, and they won't accept that. They'll say, you know what, I mean, obviously they don't say this to you, but they think this in their mind. It's just like, I'm just like anybody else. I've just had this experience, or I just wrote this book. That's it. That's the only thing that makes me, that's what makes me in the public eye. But other than that, I'm basically just like anybody else,
Yeah, I mean, my experience of paganism is that it's self-empowering, and you know, everybody's empowered, everybody's important. I've heard some of the people I know, some of the pop, kind of celebrity pagans, shall we say, I've heard them talking to people who've come up and asked for an autograph or something like that, and they've made that person go away feeling special and important themselves. And there are some people who just have a gift for that, of helping others to, you know, I've looked at people and I thought, I can see why you're an important person. I can see why you're a powerful priest or a powerful magician, because I've watched you infuse somebody else who's perhaps a beginner on the path, who's come up for an autograph and has gone away with that feeling that, wow, that was, I got something that person gave me something special, special and important. Everybody's special. We're a planet that exists with 6.5 billion eccentrics on it. Everybody's an individual, special, got their own, you know, thing that makes them fascinating and amazing and wonderful. And as soon as you start forgetting that, then we've got problems, haven't we?
Right.
I think the pagan community has seen its share of would-be gurus. And some of them, it never fails to amaze me how they think they can going to get away with making some of the claims that they do, you know, and ultimately they don't. And I think that the pagan community is particularly aware of that. And as you say, anybody who starts building a pedestal for themselves, they'll find that there's a pretty hefty gang of pagan deconstructionists ready to leap into action and disabuse them of the notion that they're any more important than the rest of us.
Right.
And you know, more power to the pagan community's elbow for that.
Yeah. And I think it's also kind of part of our approach to spirituality, or I try to find a good word for it, but our approach to our practice, I guess is the best way to put it, kind of like what we had talked about before and what you mentioned there, that empowerment. It's kind of like we find that it comes from inside of us, not outside of us. So any good teacher is going to teach you to look inside of yourself and find that power within you, not outside of you. Because if you look for it outside of you, you're not going to find it, because it's inside of you. And obviously some people who want to be gurus, not necessarily are gurus, but want to be gurus, are going to say that you have to find it within me. And that's where you know this guy's not a good teacher, or this lady's not a good teacher. Because if they really wanted you to be empowered, they would tell you to find it within yourself, you know.
And ye who would seek, for all that seeking and yearning,
Right.
know this, that if thou canst not find it within thee, thou will never find it without thee.
Right, exactly.
Scripture for you.
It's written somewhere. It's written somewhere, right?
You've heard that before. No, I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
That's right there. That's kind of exactly what that passage is. Well,
Absolutely,
on the one level,
absolutely.
so yeah, I thought for a minute you were quoting from it, but you're right. That was making that point that it comes from within, and that self-empowerment. And somebody else, there's no reason you shouldn't help somebody else to become self-empowered. But
Right.
you know, it doesn't come from. If that's what you seek, is power, is
Right.
strength, position in society, and not, you know, it shouldn't be assuming. We shouldn't make assumptions about what everybody's goals are in life. You know, being rich, being famous, being popular. There's also all these things that are to some people are important, and to others they're not. Seeking, if you need it by validating that from other people externally, then you've got a problem. There's something wrong with you. There's something that needs fixing within you. You know, I think we should just keep trying to be the best people we can and not hurt anybody else. You know?
Right.
And if you could just go through life just trying as hard as you can to be yourself, to do your own will, and to do what it is that you think is most important for you, and provided it's not interfering with anybody else's, then that kind of works. And that's really all what matters. You know, I mean, I know that you and I are having this conversation in a public forum so that hopefully somebody else will get something interesting and out of it, and maybe be inspired, and maybe find some info, and maybe contact one or other of us or any of the other organizations that we represent, or the people out there, and that would be great. You know, that would be fantastic if somebody finds their way to something because of what we've overheard, because I know that's how I found all the things that fulfill me and satisfy me, and all the wonderful and terrible experiences I've had that have some of them both at the same time, I must say. So that's probably down to some of the people I know. But you get to that point in your life where you look. I mean, if I met the younger me and said 30 years, that person had looked up at me and they'd have gone, I'd like that. I think they would. I think that would have been exciting. And I'd have to say to them, but it's not what you think it's going to be. It isn't like that. If you'd said to me as an 18-year-old, one day you'll be on the television and people will be listening to what you're saying, I'd be like, that'd be great. Wow. But it isn't like that,
Yeah.
If you had to spend a week worrying about what you were going to say and making sure you didn't come over as an idiot and all those, because it's now that it's the experience again. And I think that's some of the thing for that at a future date, that expectation that people have of what's going to happen when they become a pagan, when they join a cult like the Wiccans, or and managing that expectation so that people understand it. That's part of the journey too, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I was going to say, being kind of like in that light, being that face of the foundation, you do kind of have to be careful of what you say. But the good thing, especially in our community, is that even if you did slip up and do something, I don't think anybody's going to, like, oh no, he did that. How could he do that? And then just like, tear you off of that. I mean, it's an understanding that we have that sometimes things happen, mistakes are made, and then we just move on and say, you know what, okay, whatever, and then we just continue on. I don't know if I explained.
It's true. I mean, I'm the luckiest. Of all the people who are in a position with an organisation like I am, where they're seen as the bit of the face of it now. And previously it was John. But John used to say to me how lucky we are that we've got Doreen, because within paganism, Doreen is she's such a universal beacon of respect from everybody.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I could name a number of famous people, not just in paganism, but if you were president of their fan club, there'd be a bit of you that when you close your eyes at night, you'd think, oh, there's something not. But Doreen, I'm not saying she's Saint Doreen of the Wicca. I'm definitely not saying that. But she's universally respected, and we're on to a start already because, in some ways, John and I talked about it, and the other trustees as well, and Julie, John's wife, and we've said that Doreen's we'd like the foundation and the Centre for Pagan Studies to be seen as an organisation, what Doreen was in the way that Doreen was seen as an individual, and that was somebody that had that was friends with everybody and that everybody liked and was biased. I mean, I know that it's in my personal nature to be Mr. Peacekeeper. I'm a bit self-deprecating, as you know. I'm happy to make some fun of myself, and I think that's a very good trait. And John was of a similar nature, actually. You would go a long way to get before John became arrogant about anything. But it's being friends with everybody is really important, that our organisation is seen that way, because I believe that Doreen's legacy belongs to everybody on the planet, but those in the pagan community have a connection to it. Those who are witches have a connection that's different on a different level. Those who are initiated do as well. But I think it's really important that I'm really lucky to be part of an organisation whose job, if you like, is to be able to be friendly and helpful and informative to everybody. We haven't got a crusade. We're not on a crusade. I do that in the other parts of my life with things like our religious education in schools and the representation in the rest of the community and so on. And I'll work with other people like the Pagan Federation and the Children of Artemis over things like the symposium and dealing with issues within our community. The people who are setting themselves up as gurus, people who are abusive, that sort of thing, people who are in trouble, who have got problems. We've done legal cases and things like that. That confrontational stuff's one thing, but I'm really lucky that the organisation I'm doing, the only thing we've got to do is keep talking to people and keep people talking to each other. I think that'd be a nice thought to end on.
All right.
Yeah, do you know what, we were laughing the other day about what should be on your tombstone, and I'm torn whether I'd like to think that people would say, "Oh, Ashley Mortimer tried to help people." That would be a good one. But I think the truth is we were smiling about it the other day, that what we were saying about being the face of something and appearing in the media. I think my tombstone should just say Ashley Mortimer.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah. That would be good.
Like that.
It'd be a
Not
good
too
goal.
much of a twin. I'd have to think about what mine would be. So
Go on.
I can't even think of it. I can't even think of anything right now.
Say the first thing. Say the first thing that comes into your head.
Be right back after these messages.
There you go, Lalokan Skathak. Be right back. I'll be right back.
Yeah, but I'm going to be cremated. I'm not going to be buried. So.
All right, then I'll be back later. It might take a bit longer. Yeah.
There you go. So, all right, Ashley, I don't want to keep you. I'm hoping that I'm realizing now that I think that there was some confusion about the where I was posting this, and I think people earlier I'd gotten a Facebook message from someone, so I'm hoping people are seeing us live. I've been seeing only just a couple of viewers, so but that's okay because they'll be able to watch it, you know, after the fact.
Yeah,
so
we'll get the link. We'll post the link around afterwards as well, and people will see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about that. My apologies to anyone. I have 2 accounts, and I think that there was some confusion with one of the links that I put up, so people weren't able to see this. Not too many people were able to see this live, but they can definitely see it afterwards. So
I think they'll be grateful that they didn't have to sit through it all in one sitting. Yeah.
They can fast forward through certain bits.
Yeah, all the bits where I'm speaking, get rid of those. Yeah.
All right. So,
listen,
Ashley,
it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been a pleasure to know that, you know, there are other people who are going to listen to this, and it'll be recorded and out there. Any of you out there support, I want to say thank you publicly to everybody, to you, Lalokan, and to people like you who've, you know, got that ability to pull other people in to help. But the massive amount of support in the community has been phenomenal, and it's enabled us to do some great things, and we're going to do some even greater ones together, all of us. And personally, I'm just really so grateful that there's been no troubles or fallings out, as far as I know, that most people are pretty much on board with the legacy of Doreen and with supporting paganism. And if we all pull together a bit more, you know, it's great. And thank you to everybody who I interact with, because it's an absolute pleasure to be able to be privileged enough to meet other people and to hear what other people have got to say and help them with their causes.
Yeah. Yes, and thank you, Ashley, too, because I know that you and there's probably a whole group of people in the Doreen Foundation who are, like you said, like Sarah, your girlfriend, who are in the back, who are doing the work, and they don't get the attention and the recognition. And so I think it's important to recognize how hard they work. All their efforts contribute to the greater, you know.
But it's all those other people. I mean, those members, the members of the foundation, our volunteers, the trustees, the girlfriends and wives of the trustees, but it's everybody. It's everybody out there in that pagan community. Everybody who reads a post on Facebook, who, you know, shares a post or who does anything. We're all, and it's not just the foundation. It's paganism, and it's the way that it's represented outwardly. You know, and we have got a fantastic community, and everybody really does deserve a big pat on the back, because everyone is. The community itself is projecting the way into the world that's showing us as not too much of twits collectively. You know, I hope that I'm not too much of a twit. I think paganism, it's important. It's a motto for pagans in the wider world, and it's good. It's good that that's the case. But everybody's doing something. Everybody contributes. Everybody. And you know, I think we have to be very aware of that and look out for our brothers and sisters, our other humans, and 2-leggeds, 4-leggeds, and the winged ones, and everybody else.
Definitely. All right, and again, thank you, Ashley, and as always, a pleasure.
Absolutely, we could talk a lot more, and we will, I'm sure.
All right.
Just not now.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we can set up another time. So.
I'd like that. Yeah, we should perhaps try and stick to the script and stick to the subject as well.
Yeah, that's too boring. All right. Thanks again. Take care.
Thanks again. We'll speak to you soon. Okay. Bye-bye.